Hello, my wonderful third graders. We are still in Domain 6, the Viking Age, and this is Lesson 8. This is our last lesson in this domain, in this unit, and this is called Sailing to a New Land. If you remember, yesterday, in our lesson, Bjorn and Tolly were leaving Norway to go to Iceland on a cargo ship. All right, some vocabulary you will hear throughout the read aloud. Accurate means correct. Enabled means made possible. Having a librarian friend enabled Ariel to know when new books arrived at the library. Invaluable means priceless, very useful. Mingling means moving about and interacting with a group, mixing with. Before class started, the students were mingling in the hall. A tripod is a three-legged support or stand for a piece of equipment. All right, let's get started. Let's hear what happened to Bjorn and Tolly in their new land. We needed the wind to speed us on our way. Having asked Njord to give us strong winds and calm seas, the sailors began to row with all their might out into the ocean in a northerly direction. Depending on the winds, our journey could take anywhere from 10 to 20 days to complete. On board, there was one sailor who had already journeyed to Iceland several times before. His knowledge of the ocean waters was invaluable or very useful, and he clearly ruled the roost. As we traveled, other sailors watched the ocean's currents, observed the behavior of the seabirds and sea mammals, and looked to the stars and the position of the sun for direction. All of this enabled them to steer an accurate course across the ocean. You remember Njord was another one of the Viking gods. He was the god of the wind and of the seas. What do you think ruled the roost means? What do you think? What's a roost? What kind of animal does it make you think of? We'll talk about that a little bit later. After we lost sight of land, the sailors stopped rowing, and just as Tully had said they would, they raised the mainsail. I noticed that they were using a weather vane to show the wind direction. As the day progressed, the wind picked up, and we began to move swiftly across the ocean. Tully and I were not just passengers, we had to work to be on board the ship. We were responsible for adding to the food supplies by fishing, as well as helping to cook. As the sun began to set on our first day on board the ship, Tully and I fished and talked about home. We were lucky. Within a short time, we caught several large white fish. We gutted and deboned them, and then cut them up into pieces ready to be placed into a large cooking pot. So to gut a fish is to remove all the insides, and to debone is to take the bones out. These steps are common before eating fish. Fire for cooking was started in a large cauldron. The cauldron was suspended from an iron tripod. A smaller pot for cooking was hung over the fire. We had a plentiful supply of salted and smoked meat on board. It was stored in several large dry barrels. We would be able to make bread each day as well, and we had some chickens too. Fresh water was kept in special barrels that were sealed to keep out salt water. Why would you think they would want to keep salt water out of the fresh water? Would you want to drink that? Ew, no. Humans need fresh waters to drink. We can't drink salt water safely. What number does the prefix tri represent? Remember, like a triangle or a tricycle? We've talked about this. It means 3. So a tripod has 3 legs, as you can see in this picture. 1, 2, 3. Uno, dos, tres. As one day led to another, Tully and I quickly established a routine on board the ship. We would begin the day by fishing, then we would wash and help prepare breakfast for the crew and others on board. After breakfast, we would help clean the deck and give out supplies of drinking water. We would tend to the fire in the cauldron, and when late afternoon came, we would once again cast our fishing lines into the ocean. One evening when we were fishing, Tolly told me an interesting story about the place that would soon be our home. Do you know, Bjorn, who was the first successful Viking to settle in Iceland? Tolly asked. I told Tolly that I could not remember. He shook his head, winked at me, then continued. It was the valiant Ingolfur Artenson, also known as just Ingolf. Others had tried before but had failed. He was determined to succeed. Ingolf did not know where the best place to settle was, so he asked the gods to help him. He cast wooden posts. He cast wooden posts into the ocean and waited for them to wash ashore. Can you all think back to the first read aloud you heard and remember the name of the first Viking? Yes, right, Ingolf. When they did, he began to build the settlement we now call Reykjavik, on that very spot. Tolly loved to talk, and he often had stories about our brave warriors and explorers. Much to Tolly's disappointment, we did not encounter any sea monsters on our voyage. One day, however, a large fish flew right up out of the water while we were fishing and scared us both half to death. The wind was with us all the way, and after 2 days of sailing north, we shifted our course and sailed west. Apart from 2 nights of heavy rain, our journey was easy and uneventful. We completed our voyage in good time, catching our first sight of land at midday on the 14th day. As we sailed closer to let's make sure I can Reykjavik, we could see mountains rising up in the clouds, some with snow still coating the tops, as well as large areas of beautiful green pasture land. The houses had green grass growing right on the roofs, as if the fields were growing on top of them. There wasn't an impressive wharf like the one in our hometown. Instead, there was a small, muddy harbor area. A large group of people stood in the mud waiting for our ship to arrive. As we approached, I could tell that many of them were simply curious bystanders. All the people in Iceland lived on farms in the countryside. A sailor who had been to Iceland before told me that it was always exciting for the Icelanders when a ship from Norway arrived. People gathered at the shore to see what was happening, get news from Norway, and see whether there were goods to be traded. You can see some actual photographs here of what Iceland looks like. It looks beautiful. Tolly and I disembarked the ship and walked towards the crowds of people. Although we didn't know anyone, the inhabitants of this new land looked strangely familiar. They looked and talked just like the people back home. We walked slowly, mingling with the crowd and taking in the new sights and sounds. Twice we had to explain to a small boy that we were not interested in buying a falcon that he appeared to be selling. Although Tolly did stop for a moment to consider whether or not it'd be advantageous for him to own a bird of prey. That means advantageous means a good thing or useful. We had never met our Uncle Vali and Toonie, as they had left our homeland before we were born. In many ways, they would be our newly adopted fathers. Suddenly, a man the size of a bear with a long, untrimmed beard came charging towards us. He grabbed hold of me and then clapped Tolly hard on the back. Do you think he's a friend or foe? Nephews, welcome to Iceland. Not much I know, but you'll get to like it. I would know you anywhere. I am your Uncle Vali, he exclaimed and then laughed out loud. Ho, ho, ho. How was your journey? How are your parents? Your cousins can't wait to meet you. I expect you are hungry. Uncle Vali continued to talk and ask questions all at the same time. He did not seem to need any answers to his questions, and so Tolly and I simply nodded or agreed with almost everything he said as we followed him through the streets of our new town. Our legs felt very shaky as we walked through the muddy streets. Having been at sea for so many days, we still had our sea legs and were not yet used to firm ground. It was a strange feeling, and on a number of occasions I thought I was going to fall flat on my face in the mud. After several minutes of walking through the same kind of narrow, muddy streets as the ones we had left behind, I began to hear some familiar sounds. We were approaching Uncle Vali's forge. He was a blacksmith like my father, and I would be working as an apprentice with him and his son, Ivar, whereas Tully would be farming with Uncle Toonie and his family. As we approached my uncle's longhouse, I could see immediately that it was quite different from our house at home. It was one of the long houses that had grass growing right on top of it. "I wonder if they graze their cows up there," Tully whispered with a grin on his face. "These turf homes keep us nice and warm," Uncle Toonie explained as he noticed our reaction to the house. "Come inside. There are many people waiting to meet you." As we entered my uncle's home, I could see immediately that, although the outside was different, the inside was not. It contained one long, dimly lit central hall. There was also a large hearth around which many people were sitting. Once inside, I caught the smell of something really good. The aroma seemed to be coming from a large iron pot suspended above the hearth. I just hoped it wasn't fish. Immediately, a lady, little older than my mother, ran towards us. "Why do you think he wishes it wasn't fish? You think he's maybe tired of eating fish after eating fish for 14 days? These photographs show what sod or turf houses look like." "Welcome to your new home. I am your Aunt Turid." She smiled and then turned to call to the rest of the family. "Toonie, come and meet your nephews, Astrid, Hilda, Rolf, Ivar, Sigrid, come and meet your cousins." Within seconds, we were surrounded by, until now, unknown family members. Uncle Toonie stepped forward and greeted us. I was surprised by how much he looked like my father. He was quiet like him, too. Then a number of girls and boys of various ages stepped forward to say hello. Finally, an older lady who was introduced to us as Grandmother Gudrun beckoned us towards the hearth. As we sat together on the floor, she began to serve us the evening meal. It was a beef stew, and it tasted really good. Tully and I ate eagerly. Once we had eaten, Aunt Turid led us towards two raised earthen beds in the very back of the longhouse. They were covered in animal furs. "You should rest," she said softly. "You have had a long journey. Tomorrow your new life with us will begin." Then she smiled and walked away. Tully responded by throwing himself down upon his new bed and immediately falling asleep. I sat in the darkness for a long time and thought about my childhood days with my family, my journey to my new home, and all the things that might lie ahead. I knew that when I awoke the next day, I would no longer be a child. The end. Why do Bjorn and Tully ask Njord to give them strong winds? Well, they believe that there are many gods. Remember, they're polytheistic, and that the gods can help them. Strong winds are invaluable when traveling on a sailing ship, and Njord was the god of wind and sea. The Vikings were known as expert sailors. Do the sailors in the story sound like experts? Why or why not? Yes, they know how to steer an accurate course by using the stars and animals to guide them, and successfully made it to Iceland. They did a good job. Why does the geography of Iceland look What does the geography of Iceland look like from the ship? So geography is like what the land looks like and what's on the land. There were snow-capped mountains and green pastureland. What else do Bjorn and Tully see when they first spot the land of Iceland? They see houses with grass growing on the roof and a muddy harbor. How do you think they feel as they are mingling with the crowds who came to greet the newcomers? How would you feel if you went to a new land without your parents? They're probably nervous, probably wide-eyed looking at everything, maybe worried about what was going to happen, maybe a little excited to experience something new. How is Bjorn and Tully's new home in Iceland similar to their old one in Norway? How is it different? Well, for it being the same, there is a central hall. There's a large hearth, there are earthen beds covered with furs, good food is served, and is filled with a large family. And it's different because it is a turf home, meaning it is made out of the earth and not wood. Norway is a part of an area called what? Scandinavia. And so if you look at this map, here's Norway, part of Scandinavia, and they traveled all the way to Iceland over here. You can see the name of the town that they traveled to. Took them 14 days. How do you think Bjorn will act differently now that he feels he is no longer a child? Think about how he acted when he was in his old home in Norway. What do you think he might do differently now? Our word for today is enabled. In the read aloud you heard, all of this enabled them to steer an accurate course across the ocean. Say the word enabled. Enabled means made something possible. Being close to the sea and to rivers enabled the Vikings to travel to new lands in their longships. Have you ever enabled someone to do something? Have you ever been enabled by someone else to do something? So, some some synonyms for enabled are allowed, permitted, made possible. Some antonyms or opposites of enabled are blocked, prevented, stopped. An idiom is an expression whose meaning goes beyond the literal meaning of its individual words. Idioms have been passed down orally or quoted in literature and other printed texts. Idioms often use figurative language, meaning that what is stated is not literally taking place. It is important. Okay, so there's a difference between literal and figurative. Literal means actually exactly what it says, and figurative means it means something else. So rule the roost. You heard about one sailor whose knowledge of the ocean was invaluable and who ruled the roost. What do you think ruled the roost means? Have you ever heard that before? So this is an idiom. Do you know what a roost is? A roost is a wooden bar or perch where a rooster and his hens can rest together. Who do you think rules the roost? Who's in charge of the roost? It'll be the rooster, right? So rule the roost because the rooster is bigger and stronger than the hens. He reigns or rules over the roost. Rule the roost refers to a person who takes charge and bosses others around. So who ruled the roost on the Nar on the ship? The sailor who had journeyed to Iceland several times before. So he knew what he was doing, so he kind of got to be the boss and tell everyone else how to do what they needed to have a good journey. Have you ever had an experience where rule the roost applies, where you could have used that statement? How could you use the statement rule the roost? Who rules the roost at your house? Who rules the roost when you're playing with your friends? Basically, it means who's in charge. All right, good job, third graders. I'm sad that our time with the Vikings is coming to the end, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.